Okay. So did you want me to introduce myself or do you want to?
I'll introduce you. I'll do it officially. I'll be official.
Oh, okay.
Uh, Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, good night, wherever you're joining us from, whenever you're watching this in the future or presently live with us. Thank you for joining us at Global Lawyers of Canada for this week's edition of Virtual Mentor Office Hours. This week, we are joined by the lovely Paula Price. Paula is ex-Big Law, now turned career coach, specializing in lawyers and particularly law students. So very appropriate for many of you here tonight. Paula is going to be sharing a few tips and tricks around how we can showcase our wonderful skills to their best advantage. So Paula, my first question for you is, tell us a little bit about your history. Tell us a little bit about your journey. I know we talked about this off camera slightly earlier, but how did you come to the Canadian bar and then become a law coach later on?
Yeah, so it's a little bit of an odyssey, Siobhan. So I'll spare you every nuance and detail along the way. The short-ish answer, I guess, is I'm from Vancouver originally, and my initial interest in law developed when I was 19. I went overseas and I was a nanny for a family in Switzerland for a year. And the woman that I worked for there, the mother of the family, was an international lawyer. She had worked for the International Red Cross. She'd lived in Bangkok. She'd been through all sorts of neat experiences through that. And so that idea kind of stuck with me. And when I went back to university, because I'd taken a gap year, I eventually pursued law, and I went to McGill thinking that I would somehow follow in the footsteps and become an international lawyer myself. And what ended up being my path was going to Bay Street. I followed the recruitment process that most of the other students were following, and I worked at a large national firm for articles, and then I moved back to my native Vancouver and progressed into a litigation career. I started as a litigator in a boutique firm, and then I joined Stike & Elliott, where I practiced for, I guess, just over a decade in their commercial litigation group. So at a certain point, I think, after having the experience of working as a lawyer, it was a wonderful, wonderful opportunity. I learned a lot. There are a lot of skills, as we'll talk about, that you develop in practice. But I think there was something that eventually called me to wanting to do something else. What I got really, really excited about was people, helping the students in the law firm. I got involved in the interview process. I became involved in some of the onboarding training for students. And I also got really interested in the development side of lawyers at different levels. And I discovered coaching and decided that I wanted to become an executive coach. Googled lawyer coach and discovered that such a thing actually existed, and kind of set my sights on that. So for the past few years, I've become certified as an executive coach, and I'm building my coaching practice, focusing on lawyers. I do work with a number of students and lawyers at all stages of practice. So that's, in a nutshell, kind of the trajectory. And I love that you asked me this question, because when I was preparing my answers, I thought, the initial appeal to me was the international flavor of what this lawyer was doing. And what a lovely turn of events that I get to be speaking here with the Global Lawyers of Canada, which is, in effect, it's an international community. And I'm just so honored and delighted to have this opportunity to speak with you and to speak with members of the GLC today. So thank you.
Well, thank you for joining us. And I love that we're making this a full circle for you.
Indeed, yeah. It's wonderful.
Things really do happen for a reason. And there we go. Here we back are at the very beginning, where we were talking about things happening for a reason. So you touched on transferable skills in your introduction just there. And you're obviously a prime example of how you were able to extract all those bits that you loved about your job and then apply them to help other people excel at their positions and their future careers. Can you tell us a little bit about what is a transferable skill and how do you identify them?
Thank you so much, Shimon. And I'm totally flattered when you said that about me, that I have these transferable skills and I've used them somewhere else. I was a little bit flabbergasted. I thought, do you have the right person? But that's one of the funny things about transferable skills, is that you may not always see them in yourself. It sometimes takes somebody else to point them out to you. A transferable skill, I think you've explained, is really a skill that you develop in one job that you can then use in another job. So one resource that I would point everybody to, if they're interested, the Canadian Bar Association, the CBA, has a website. And if you Google CBA plus transferable skills, they've actually got a page where they talk about different career options for lawyers. And they have a list of transferable skills. So just to give you a bit of an idea, what they have on their list is ability to work independently, analytical thinking, brainstorming, budgeting, communication, creativity, decision-making. These are all skills that you acquire in one job that you can apply to something else. So where that would become relevant, for example, in my work, I worked as a litigator. I did a lot of writing. I did a lot of conflict resolution. I did questions, discovery questions, interacting with a number of different types of people, research. There were all sorts of pieces that were part of my practice that I now do. I just do them in a different setting. One example is webinar work. So I do, as part of my sort of portfolio of projects, I do webinar work. And what I have found is that a lot of the skills that I use to prepare for court, like having an outline, getting everything ready, having all the tech pieces lined up in advance, knowing what the purpose is of the presentation, going in and actually delivering that presentation, so having everything organized, making sure that your tech pieces are all in line. These are all skills that I used as a litigator. They're now skills that I'm using in a coaching capacity, albeit in more the communication piece of what I do. I think what is really interesting is when you go to discover your own skills. So I had a call recently with a client, a relatively junior lawyer who is considering transitioning out of pure law and maybe doing something more in the field of HR. And so we had this beautiful conversation where she talked about writing an application and CV for a position that was a non-legal position. And she said that in this process, she realized that in all of her legal employment, she had been involved in this HR component. So it was onboarding, it was training, it was working with students, it was designing policy manuals. And as she put all these pieces together, it's like they were breadcrumbs. And she used the term breadcrumbs. And I thought it was such a beautiful term because it highlighted this idea that even though your job is in this legal category, over time, the threads that you can pull from that, the pieces that really resonated, all point to the same direction, which in her case was the HR component of her legal work. And so for her, this is now taking a collection of her transferable skills, seeing what she did, what she can talk about, what she can highlight going forward, from a legal capacity into a more of an HR capacity.
Oh, that's great. I love that idea of breadcrumbs.
I know, isn't it great?
Obvious
it's really great
thing, isn't it? Like it's great. Like if I think about some of the things that I've done, I host mentoring. So it's that kind of educational mentoring, professional development side of things that I'm involved in. But at the same time, as you say, you're hosting webinars. So it's that tech, marketing, business development side as well, because you're marketing those webinars to people, you're talking about it on social media and things. So there's lots of different things. And maybe, if you do a lot of research and you really enjoy the research side of things, maybe that's the start of your breadcrumb trail for some people as well.
Absolutely. And I think when you're looking at legal careers in particular, the nature of the work that is available is so varied within, even because there's the pure practice of law. So to me, that is, you are a lawyer, you do lawyerly things, but so the billable work, the file work, but then particularly when you get into larger firms, there are all these roles that are adjacent to the lawyers. So there's the professional development piece of it. Knowledge management, I think, is a fascinating place to be right now. Document management is another role. Being in charge of even within professional development, there's the legal education piece of it, and then there's more the professional development side of it, career growth trajectory. So there's all these different pieces, and then there's management, and that's just within a law firm itself. Once you start expanding, then there's all these different ways of practicing law. So for example, you may be practicing law in a large firm environment. That looks quite different from, let's say you decide to go out and be your own sole practitioner, or maybe you're a contract lawyer, maybe you have a completely remote practice, maybe you're part of a smaller firm, maybe you're in-house, maybe you're at a governmental organization. I mean, there's all these different ways of practicing, and there's all these roles that are adjacent to law. And so I think what is really neat as an exercise when you're looking and considering what your options are is taking, looking at your skill set, looking at what really is motivating to you, what the breadcrumbs are in your own career. It doesn't just have to be your legal work. It can be throughout the course of your education. It can be something that other people have commented about you. Maybe they've pointed out, oh, Siobhan, I see that you're amazing at getting these people together, that you've managed to create this really strong social connection among a community that previously wasn't able to find each other. And so that might be a skill that you may not, it may come so naturally to you that you don't even see it. And it sometimes takes somebody else to point out to you that you've got a skill that maybe you didn't even realize or you didn't appreciate that you had.
Absolutely. Yeah. And just because it's something you do doesn't mean it's not a skill for somebody else on that.
Absolutely.
Definitely.
Absolutely.
So we've talked a lot about those transferable skills from having a legal job. But what about those transferable skills from your non-legal work that you can then apply to either a legal position or an alternative legal position?
I think what it is really finding a way to showcase the experience that you have and showing how it's going to fit a need at the place where you seek employment. So an example is when I was working at Stikeman's and helping with the student recruitment, there were a number of factors that they would consider when evaluating student applications and going through interviews. And one factor that they were looking for at the time, and things may have changed, was what work experience does the student have that demonstrates a capacity for grit? And it was based on this idea, I don't know if you've read the book Moneyball or seen the movie Moneyball, but it's the idea that, and I'm going to get this totally wrong, or I'm going to oversimplify it, but I think it was sort of born out of the idea that we or law firms or employers typically had looked at grades, for example, as an indicator of whether or not a student would be a successful lawyer 5 years down the road. And based on a study they did in the context of baseball, what they learned was it wasn't, I don't know how many home runs you hit. It was actually, what was a stronger predictor was how resilient you were, how you'd overcome obstacles along the way. And so in that context, students were considered and evaluated based on, in part, well, what work experience does the student have that shows that they're that they have that grit, that they have that resilience that you need if you want to succeed in this sort of fast-paced environment. And so students that had like a fishing background, working on these Alaskan fishing boats, or I'm trying to think, like a hospitality background, or they were juggling multiple commitments at the same time. So showing this ability to be flexible and to persevere, be resilient, those were things that were indicative of long-term, or a promise of long-term success. I read somewhere also that, and this was an American article, that military personnel and Olympic athletes also tended to fare very well in the corporate law environment. So when you're looking at your own experience, I think what you need to take into account, I mean, the first thing, it's like anything, you need to know your audience. What does your audience really care about? What are they looking for? What do they say on their website about their firm values? What are you doing to find out more? So I would encourage anybody who's a job seeker to make as many human connections as they can, to reach out and speak to, if they're interested in a particular firm, find somebody they can speak to at the firm and find out what that firm is really all about. And when you know what the firm is looking for and you look at your own work experience and you say, okay, well, I can see how what I've done would align with what they're looking for, then you can marry the two together. Then you know really which elements of your background you can be highlighting to fit to make that connection.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's not about making up like a hobby or something. I know I talked about this recently with somebody. They said they'd gone in for an interview and they felt like they'd completely messed the interview up because they'd expressed an interest in a particular type of dance. I'd never heard of it. I had to Google it. But what they hadn't appreciated was everybody in that room immediately got out their phones and looked up what that dance was. They were intrigued enough that they actually looked it up. And from that, she'd made a connection, a memorable connection. So it's not necessarily that you need to have the exact same interests, but you have to be able to explain something, explain why you're passionate about it, so that you have that lasting memory on there as well.
Absolutely. And some of those things I don't think you can plan for. You know, I think it sometimes it lands, sometimes it doesn't. And part of that, I truly believe is the fit piece, is the, I think there was a thread on it earlier, everything happens for a reason. It may be that you're just not, maybe you are the right candidate, maybe you are the right fit, maybe you're not. You can put your best foot forward, but sometimes the chemistry, if the chemistry is not there, it's not there. And it's not a reason to get discouraged. It just means there's a better fit somewhere else.
Absolutely. So just talking about fit before we go back to our actual kind of layout for today, you've worked in a couple of different places before you started your own company. What for you were you looking for as the fit? Can you remember? Do you remember what it was? Was there one defining thing that stuck out as that's the right fit for me?
Yeah, I think fit, I in my coaching work, I talk a lot about values because I think that's where everybody really needs to start from a decision-making perspective. We all have things that are really important to us at different stages of our careers, at different stages of our personal lives. And I think your values evolve over time, depending on what's going on in your life. So I know when I look back on work that I have done, I think the things that really fit, I mean, I'll speak about my time at Stipends because that was my longest, that was kind of my longest career home. And what I found was a fit was that there were lawyers that I was working with who, when I was around them, I just felt this energy, and they were smart. They were really dedicated to the work. They were leaders in their field, but with people. They had a way of bringing people up with them. There was an attention to detail. I like that kind of, I'm that perfectionist. I want this to look just a certain way. I felt good around that I felt good around those lawyers. I felt good around that work. So I think fit is something where you feel like your values are in alignment with the values of the lawyers, or maybe they're not lawyers, that that really resonate with you. And if I look at it now, my overall values have shifted a little bit. So the things that have taken a bit more of a forefront, and it's not to say that work was right for me at that time. My focus has really shifted onto more the relationship piece, the people development piece. The things that get me really excited are seeing growth in others. I love the writing aspect of what I do, and the kind of the techie piece and trying to connect people with each other, trying to connect people with ideas, trying to give people the tools that they need to help themselves to take that next step, to maybe overcome certain things that are holding them back. Those are things that I find really compelling. And so that's what I'm drawn to in the work that I do now. So in a way, it's seeing how your values maybe shift over time, and what becomes important. And the thing that I wanted to say there is, for me, there were a few things in law that were not quite ever going to gel. In litigation, it was the adversarial component to it. I was never able to really get behind it in the way that I think I would need to get behind it to litigate it, the capacity that that I would need to. And so that sort of came to a head eventually, that, as much as I loved the people that I was working with and the environment and the challenge on one level, there was a values piece where there was a disalignment. I would never be able to, I was never one of those people that was excited to go to court, was excited to write a letter and demand documents. And it wasn't me. And so I had to find a different way to find a different direction, I guess, based on what was interesting, and then figuring out how to use the transferable skills to build something different.
I love that. Yeah, definitely. And I agree with you that over time, our values do change because our lives change, our situations change. And for many of you watching this right now and who are here with us live, your lives may have changed from when you first started this route into law, and from where you originally were coming from, your original jurisdictions. So it's okay that your values have changed. It's okay to do something different. It's working out what is important to you now, and then being very focused about that rather than going for everything, which will ultimately will help, I think, help you find the place that you can settle in better for yourself.
I totally agree, Siobhan. And one other piece, a lifestyle or real life piece. I mean, we're all in this zone of post-COVID, during COVID. I don't know how you want to characterize this, but I think this period we're in has really forced everyone to channel in or focus in, narrow down on what really matters. This happened to me when I have children, they're 7 and 5, and that created a big shift for me. My available time really drastically was shrunken, just because of our family circumstances. And so it really changed the way that I spent my time. And I think that shift, I see it happening for others, as now that we're all we're compressed into this new reality where we're working from home. The market is very odd. And I think what it's forcing people to do is really take stock of what's really important to them and build their next steps around that.
Yeah, definitely. And you know what? Find someone to talk to and talk it out and work out. Like, sometimes you need to soundboard that out loud to somebody to work out what it is that's really important to you right now. And I know for a lot of people, you may be at home on your own, because we can't really go out and be with people too much at the moment. So this is where it's really helpful to join us for sessions like this, because maybe Paula and I spark a few ideas for you, but also, find a mentor. And that mentor doesn't have to be somebody who's incredible at their job, which is always wonderful, but a mentor can also be somebody who's at the same stage as you, or someone who's just a little bit in front of you in the journey, and maybe can just see things a little bit differently. And as Paula said at the beginning, people will see things in you that you don't see in yourself. And maybe that kind of peer relationship, and that's what we call it here, is peer mentoring, when it's somebody who's a similar-ish level to you. Maybe they spot something about you you'd never thought about before, and maybe that's all you need to spark the idea of what it is that's actually important to you and what your values are. And then it starts you down this whole breadcrumb trail of amazingness to whatever the next phase is in your journey.
I'm totally nodding because I completely agree. And I just want to highlight what you said, Siobhan, about somebody sees something in you that you didn't see yourself, or maybe they express appreciation or admiration for something that you do, And that really can be enough to spark you down that path. And so I think as we all go through our journeys of finding the right path, finding, you may be in your job already, but you're looking for opportunities within your job to grow, really listening and paying attention to where you're getting that feedback and leaning into it when you discover it.
Absolutely. So the next question we had, because I think we've kind of touched on this, is preparing for interviews. So when you're preparing for an interview, so it's a little bit different to like writing a resume. I think we've kind of sort of covered that indirectly with where we were talking about pulling out your various skills. But when you get into that interview situation, and this is a very common question that a lot of our viewers might get, is your Canadian experience, or what experience can you bring to us? Do you have any tips on how people can find that experience and then showcase it in a way that's approachable for the interviewees? I mean, is this kind of going back to where we were talking about finding the fit and meeting people beforehand? Or are there some like tried and tested things that you can do? Totally throwing you on the spot, by the way.
No, I mean, I think the question is for someone who's come to Canada from abroad, and they're interviewing in a Canadian, like a firm or other employer, and the question is what skills they're bringing with them that would be attractive to a Canadian firm or organization. And I think, yes, all those things do apply. Getting to know who people at the law firm, I'm using law firm, but whatever organization it is, figuring out what they're interested in. I think looking at what you bring is really important. And you did give me this question in advance, and I was thinking about it. What is it that you might bring from another environment? And you may have okay, I'm going to go off track a little bit. If what you're applying for is a legal job, I think first and foremost, you really need to demonstrate that you either have the skills or you have the capacity to get those skills, because a job as a lawyer is very, very specific. So that's kind of the starting point. But if you practiced outside of Canada, for example, you may know things from practicing your jurisdiction that would be really important and interesting to Canadian lawyers. So for example, knowledge management. My data might be a little bit out of date, but I've been told that European law firms, for example, have really sophisticated ways of managing their legal knowledge. And so maybe you're applying to a Canadian law firm and you say, hey, I've got this experience, I know how to do things differently, and I think I can really add value. Or maybe it's a way of dealing with large litigation files that nobody here has ever really experienced, and you can bring this new skill. Or maybe the firm, I know at one point, one firm that I knew of was really interested in developing its practice with Korea in that area. And so they were looking for Korean speaking lawyers. That was a really growing part of their practice. And so if they had somebody who had a connection, that was of real value to them. Maybe there's a particular industry, maybe you come from oil and gas, and you are able to help a firm grow that element of their practice because you've got the experience, the know-how. Maybe you have sort of in-house knowledge at some other organization. So anything that you bring to the table that is maybe new or complements their existing practice areas, I think would be of real benefit. And your job is to figure out what they're looking for and how you can bring your skill set to them. I think there are also skills that are the non-industry specific. So if you've got a really great, I think what people always want to see in potential hire is, those personable skills. Are you able to figure out what people want, and are you able to deliver on that? Are you able to solve problems? Have you been effective in previous roles? Have you shown growth or things that you've accomplished? So there's a number of skills that may not be specifically related to the practice, but they show an ability and a capacity in you to rise to the challenge and contribute to the next organization that you will be joining.
Great. I have nothing to add. There you go. In a nutshell. Boom. The next question I had was mistakes. What is the number one mistake you see when people are trying to showcase their skills? Now, you might have seen this when you were working at a law firm whilst you're involved in the student recruitment side of things, or maybe even now when you're talking in your coaching side and you see what people are doing. And you may have more than one.
Yeah, I think I had, I think there are two things that I would highlight here. And again, I'm going to sound a little bit like a broken record. I think the first thing is probably not being specific enough. So taking a kitchen sink approach and saying, well, I guess these are all the things, so I'm just going to throw them all into my cover letter or wherever and hope that something in here resonates with the person that's reading this. I like to think of this almost as making a court application where you're going in with a very specific purpose. So what is the purpose of your cover letter? Are you trying to get a meeting with somebody, or maybe you're not at that stage yet. Maybe you're trying to reach out to somebody and make a connection with somebody in anticipation of there potentially being a job. But I think if you're trying to highlight your skills, it helps to know what skills actually matter to them. And once you know that, then you can really tailor your skills and show how they're actually relevant to the organization. I think the other thing that I would say would be to frame things positively, to have your mindset being on what you're bringing to the table as opposed to what you're not bringing to the table. So it's kind of a mindset, speaking of things in a very positive way, and that the way that you frame your skills, I think that's important.
Yeah, that brings me thinking back to something you said earlier, where if you don't know something or you don't have the knowledge in a particular area, don't dwell on the fact that you don't know it, but showcase the fact that you have the ability to learn and the desire to learn. So that's switching the mindset from I don't have this to the positive of something, if that makes sense. You see a couple of heads going, oh yeah. So hopefully that made sense to a few people. This brings me nicely to summer programs, internships, work experience, volunteering. That's our next mini thing. So Paula, tomorrow, it's the last day of the very first, I think, not your average summer program for law students that you have been running with your first cohort. Can you tell us a little bit more about what the program is and why it's not your average summer program?
Not your average summer program, because it's never been done before. As far as well, I've never done it before. Thank you, Siobhan. No, I finished. It's a 6-week online program for law students, and today was the last day of my first cohort of students. We had 13 students from across Canada and one from Norway. And the nature of the program is really to teach students. Well, it's based on my own experience. I was the first lawyer in my family. I didn't know what I was getting myself into back in 2002 when I first set foot in a law firm, and I made a lot of mistakes, and I think I probably could have avoided them had I known what was coming next. I also think it took me a very long time, like maybe 40 years, to start thinking of my career as something that I had control over. I think I was very much in this mindset of drifting and letting other people make decisions for me. So I was in law school, I kind of followed the path. I went to law firms, I followed the path. I was never good at being the person that goes and like knocks on doors and solicits work. And, you know, it's just not what I was comfortable with. And since starting my own coaching practice, I've really had to do a lot of work on taking initiative and being proactive. And what I've realized is that I should have started doing this a really long time ago. And so the purpose of the course is really twofold. One is, what are the skills that you need to thrive in a professional environment? And those are the things that, I live and breathe as a coach. So time management, goal setting, values, figuring out what, feedback. We did our last one, our course day was about feedback, so how to really maximize that. And then some of the more technical things like how to deliver an effective presentation, how to write effectively. So those are the things that we cover. But the theme that runs throughout is taking ownership, right? Like you might not get, today it was all about firms try, but they're not really always going to be able to deliver on the feedback front. And so your job is to go out and solicit feedback, learn how to get feedback from others, learn how to give yourself feedback, learn how to do that in a way that's effective so that you're moving forward. So that's the nature of what I do. And it was quite, it was my first time running the program. I had thought about doing it last year, but this year was the year that I did the first round of the course. And I'm doing another one starting next week, and the registration is like by tomorrow. If anyone is interested in signing up for it, I'm obviously happy to have you and happy to answer questions. And that has been, it's just been a really neat experience. I think the ability to speak with students, to figure out what exactly they're working on, what their challenges are, because it is different depending on the student. Some are really interested in polishing their legal writing. Some of them are really interested in figuring out how to connect in a virtual context. They are onboarding this summer in a virtual way. They are joining a law firm without actually setting foot inside the law firm. And maybe they have reservations about reaching out to lawyers within the firm. And so there's all these really neat conversations that we are able to have. And it's really, it's been really amazing doing the work with them.
Sounds great. I wish that had been around when I was looking for summer internships. Instead, I went in and worked 70 hours a week doing redactions on documents that were going to go out for disclosure exercises for a huge intellectual property case. And I literally sat there for 11, 12 hours a day with a black marker. So, this is a very different type of summer internship program to what I experienced in mine. This is definitely more of those soft skills, the skills that quite often don't get taught. We get taught how to look at a case and analyze it and then apply it to whatever the facts are that we're now looking at for our clients. But some of these softer skills, on the other hand, you're just expected to know. And they're not always skills that come naturally to a lot of us, or maybe one does, but maybe the other ones don't. So this is a great opportunity. If you're interested, tiny little plug for Paula, you can find it on her website, and you can have a look into it yourself. But do you have any tips, Paula, for how people can go about finding some of these other programs? I mean, yours obviously sounds fantastic, but do you have any tips for people in general about other ways they can find them, especially right now, right? Because so many of these programs appear to have gone virtual, maybe not so much in Canada, but definitely in Europe and America, they're doing lots and lots of virtual internships, which is a whole new ball game. But do you have any tips, any thoughts about things for people?
It's a great question. I should qualify it. My course is not accredited for anything. So this is really an elective, supplemental, I want to learn how to thrive in a law firm course, to be distinguished from a course that would qualify for some credit. So I just wanted to make sure that was clear. I think in terms of what's available for students, I don't know of all of them. I think the Legal Sherpa is the only one that I'm really aware of. I think some students are posting online about different programs that they're following and certificates that they're getting. So I wish I could give you a more extensive list. I can't. Legal Sherpa is the only one the only name that comes to mind. But I think if you were to Google, law, and maybe it depends on where you are. If it's a UK, it's the summer. They have a different word. Traineeship, I think, or you might have to use different search terms, but you may be able to find some online training for law students.
But do you have any tips about how people can approach looking for it? Like, apart from like Googling, but are there any things that people can do to kind of make themselves maybe stand out when they're applying for these positions? Any kind of any things you would recommend? Like, I mean, you did a summer internship, you did a summer articling program back in the day. Do you remember
Right.
anything about what you did? And obviously, time has moved on. It has for me too. We're in a different phase now. But do you remember doing anything that you thought, that was really smart that I did, that it was really helpful, or anything that maybe any of your coaching clients have talked about that you thought, that was a great way of approaching that, to like find some of these programs out there, or even just once they found it, to get the best out of the program for themselves and their future careers?
So do you mean like the articling programs and the summer programs at firms?
Anything like that? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, because I think there's there's the process for qualifying through articles and that, and I think if that's the situation that somebody is in and what they're trying to do is find a firm to attach themselves to or an opportunity for articles, um, I think that's where we get back to the networking piece. I would recommend the webinar that Eric and Cleo and I did. Eric Pye dropped a link to it in the chat, and I think we can add a link to it on LinkedIn. It's really excellent. They talk a lot about the importance of networking, the importance of just reaching out and making it known that you're interested in taking on some element of work, right? So maybe you're looking for articles and you want to become a corporate solicitor. And so you want to get out there and talk to people and let them know that that's what you're looking for. I think in this economy, well, and as you know, the Canadian market, a lot of these positions, especially the ones at larger firms, they go through a lockstep process, that is basically coordinated between the law schools and the law firms. So looking out for opportunities that aren't in that process necessarily, which would require that interview, the informational interview, reaching out. LinkedIn is a wonderful resource. I see a lot that is posted on LinkedIn about students, articling students, opportunities for students, people who are trying to, I think employers, schools, firms, everybody is quite, I think they're all wanting students to succeed and recognizing that this is a really challenging time, that not only are we all trapped working from our bedrooms or whatever it is that we're doing, but we're also in an economy where maybe it's not as robust, and so the job opportunities may not be there. That being said, there are areas that are, as I've heard, thriving. So labor and employment, insurance, some class action work. There are areas, bankruptcy and insolvency, where there may be more opportunities, but you need to find out about them. So the thing that I would recommend, I think when you talked about getting a mentor, absolutely reaching out to professionals in the legal community that you want to connect with, people who maybe work in the field that you want to work in, contacting them. Eric had some wonderful suggestions about how to approach people, not necessarily saying, hey, do you have a job for me, but more like, hey, I see that you practice in bankruptcy and insolvency and you were just recently working on this restructuring. I think it's really interesting. Can we have a chat about how you got to where you are? So questions that allow that person to have a conversation with you without feeling the pressure of having to produce a job at the end of it, or if they don't have a job available, turn you away before you even have a chance to have that conversation.
Absolutely. Yeah. And especially I think in this market right now, most people know that if you're contacting them for one of two reasons. It's either you're trying to sell them something or you're asking them for a job. So you almost don't need to tell them that because it's implied. But as you say, Paula, like having a conversation, getting to know that person, building that relationship, suddenly doors might open, maybe not immediately, but doors might start to open further down the line and an opportunity might arise that otherwise wouldn't have done if you just knocked on the door and said, hey, give me a job.
And I think it's important, following on that, to consider that the relationships aren't just relationships that are temporary. I'm looking for a job. When I've gone through different stages of looking for jobs or networking or whatever it is, and the relationships that I formed in those early stages, they're really positive connections are ones that I've maintained. And so it may be that you initially contacted somebody because you wanted to find work, but 20 years later, you're still on a positive relationship with them, and there's still some element of connection. I think of a recruiter that I spoke with when I moved to Vancouver. I was looking for a first year position, and he wasn't able to place me. Most recruiters won't be able to place a first year associate, but he put me in contact with a few lawyers, and I always think very fondly of him because he was able to help me. And so in the future, when I've had colleagues or friends or whoever who've been looking for legal placements, he's the first person that comes to mind. So, it works both ways. Not only are you able to reach out and connect with people, you may also be in a position to connect other people, and that in the long run, people really appreciate being helped, especially right now. And so I would encourage both sides of it, not just the reaching out, but also figuring out who you can connect to somebody who might help them.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I've done something very similar very recently as well, with somebody that I reached out to when I was looking for articles and I was trying to work out what practice area I wanted to work in. Did I want to go back into corporate, which is what my original background was, corporate and securities, or did I want to explore construction and real estate, which I had done as part of my training contract in the UK, but had moved very quickly away from it. So I'd been reaching out to real estate lawyers in the city. I'd kept in contact, and recently I was actually able to reach back out, ask them for some advice on a file that I was working on, and ultimately send them the file. So I actually was able to refer the work to them. And so that's a relationship that I've built over the last 7 years with that person. And finally I was able to give them some work. So I felt really good. We'll see if it turns into anything profitable for him, but there we go. At least it was something on that one. So talking of that, we mentioned there about the relationships, and you were talking about being a first year call and actually moving from Ontario to Vancouver, and that segues pretty nicely into lateral hires and people who maybe have been laid off right now, given the job market. Do you have any tips and advice in addition to what we'd already been talking about in terms of identifying those transferable skills and finding those bits and pieces that relate to people that will make you a standout candidate? Do you have any other kind of advice for people?
Probably not a lot that's new. I think if you have been laid off and you don't have work to do, there are maybe a couple of things. I would keep up the networking as much as possible. I would also do maybe some skills development / soul searching. So maybe keeping on top of what's happening in your practice area. You might have this as a period of reevaluation. For some people, this COVID, this pandemic, the kind of restructuring of how we do things has prompted changes that maybe lawyers weren't going to make. They were kind of trudging through and they were comfortable. This might be an opportunity to reevaluate. The other thing that I would suggest, and it's way easier said than done, is to just try to find something to hang your hat on that is uplifting. So this is well, I want to say it's temporary. I think it is temporary. I think we will all eventually find a new normal that is more normal than what we're experiencing right now. And certainly I think that everyone who has been displaced will find a new place. And it's really hard to appreciate that in the moment, especially if you've got financial concerns. I would encourage those individuals to really find a support network and to try to find ways to stay positive, because it's a lot, I hate to, it sounds, I don't want it to sound like, well, anyways, I'll just say it. But as an employer, if you have a candidate who is positive and optimistic and looking to contribute, I think it's a lot easier to make that hire than it is if somebody is kind of, they don't have that energy. They don't believe in themselves, or they don't see the possibility. I think whatever you can do to keep your morale boosted. And like I said, I know it's easier said than done, and I say it with like the most empathy possible, but doing that for yourself, I think is not only good for your health, I think it's good for your prospects as you try to find new work.
Absolutely. No, I completely agree with that. And that segues really nicely into our last official section, because I know we're rapidly running out of time. So if you do have questions, please do put them in the chat box. We will come to them. But this is the last official section, which is a couple of things more around, kind of similar actually to what we were just discussing. But do you have any tips, especially this is coming from your coaching lens, of how to fight the fear of failure? How to have self-confidence in situations of adversity, which is kind of similar to what we were just talking about with somebody who maybe is in a position where they've been transitioned out. But do you have any tips around that? Some of your coaching wisdom?
I could probably talk for hours about failure. It's made its way into a number of presentations I've done recently. I've got it's on, if you go to my UpLevelCPD.com website, on the course registration page, there's a webinar I did yesterday. There's 5 practices for long-term success, and one of those practices is redefining the way that you look at failure. It's something that I believe really strongly in. Failure is defined as not meeting expectations. That is really a wonderful thing, because it means that you get to adjust your expectations and therefore redefine what you consider failure. There's a coach that I follow who says you should be failing at least 5 times. You should have 5 failures on your calendar every month, at least, because that is an indication that you're out there and you're trying. So I would strongly encourage everybody. I mean, maybe, if you lose your job, that in itself it's very demoralizing. And your next step is to start finding ways to find new employment. So maybe you're going out and you're trying to meet people, and what you find is you're reaching out to somebody and you're not getting a response, and you might see that as a failure. But you could also reframe that and say, well, okay, when I took the initiative and I wrote an email to them, or I followed up with them, you get to decide how you're going to measure your performance. And so I think we typically, especially as lawyers, I think we're really obsessed. I know when I was practicing law, I was really obsessed with the idea of failing and not failing. Now I'm like 500 steps away from that, and I will convince myself that I've succeeded on almost anything, even if I've totally failed, by taking micro pieces of it and saying, okay, well, I did this thing. X was the outcome I was really looking for. I didn't get X, but in the process, I managed to get all these other things accomplished. And so I really, maybe, looking at the glass half full or whatever it is, but it's trying to identify within a project some goals or some elements of it that you could actually define as being a learning experience, as opposed to taking the whole thing and saying, well, I completely failed. So that, every day that you push yourself forward, every day that you get up out of bed and, fight another battle, every time you have a small win, you get to define in your own life what success looks like and what failure looks like. And so I encourage everybody to try new things, to stretch themselves, to reach for things, and to accept that failure is a part of the whole process. And if you Google coach and failure, I'm sure you'll find a million podcasts that talk about Thomas Edison and the 10,000 failures that he had before he found the light bulb, or kids that are learning to walk and they stumble 500 times before they ever walk, but you would never tell a child not to continue trying to walk. So there's all these examples that are used in life where failure is just a part of the process. And what we need to do and what we need to keep in mind is that if we keep trying and we keep moving forward, eventually we're going to get there. I will credit my mom with one thing, because I know we're running out of time, but one of her favorite expressions was, persistent people begin their success where others end in failure. So I'll say it again: persistent people begin their success where others end in failure. So I think it's I like the sound of it. I think it's especially true in a job searching situation. It can be really demoralizing. And so just having that in mind, having some sort of a mantra to keep keep moving forward is really important, and hopefully will carry you through that period, because eventually you're going to come around to the other side of it. You always will, and the fact is you'll come around to the other side of it, and then something else is going to happen, something you couldn't have predicted. And so we're constantly in a state of, peaks and valleys, and that's just part of the journey.
Absolutely. That brings us back to what you were saying about grit earlier on. And it is a form of showing your grit and your resilience as you go through this process, and you do go through the peaks and the troughs of your journey. And it's finding the joy in the journey as well, despite all of the massive lows that you might be in. And it may feel like you've been in a low for a very, very long time, but it's got to go up eventually.
Yes,
we'll be here cheering you on as you go up on that one. So we've had a couple of questions come in. Because I'm conscious of time, I'm going to summarize the questions rather than opening them up to you guys. But one of them was, this is specifically for our internationally trained lawyers, and this is kind of going back a little bit to what we were discussing earlier about Canadian experience, and how do we show people that our experience is relevant and we can get across that hurdle that is that we didn't go to a Canadian law school and that we don't necessarily have that Canadian experience that people are looking for. Do you have any tips of how people could maybe phrase that, or is it a psychological thing in ourselves that we need to tackle first?
So just so I understand the frame of the question, then this is somebody who is trained. Is this somebody who's trained to practice in Canada, or they've experienced practice elsewhere?
So this is somebody who, like myself, went to law school outside of Canada, maybe has practiced to some degree outside of Canada. Now they're in Canada, they're maybe going through the equivalency process, and they're applying for positions, and there's almost this barrier. The first point of call is you have to cross this barrier to say, I have relevant experience. And it's that mindset shift of trying to change somebody else's mindset and somebody else's opinion before they've actually met you. And do you have any thoughts, any tips of how people might be able to kind of phrase that? I know it's very hard to change somebody else's mind, somebody else's opinion, but do you have any experience of how you can do that?
Yeah, I definitely don't have any experience on that particular question. I think what I would be focused on is maybe not seeking out I think I would go for the there's this model, the head pin model, where you've got the for bowling and the pins, and you've got the one pin and the two pins, and they're kind of like a diamond shape or a triangle shape. I think if I'm imagining this person on the other end of the line, they're kind of at the back. They're the head pin that hasn't knocked over yet. I'd go for the ones where they've already recognized the value of hiring an internationally trained lawyer, or where they're demonstrating some openness. So I know there are large firms that, maybe it's different now because of the economy shifting and things are more difficult, but there have been some firms that seem receptive to bringing on lawyers at an articling stage who are internationally trained lawyers. They seem to be quite comfortable with the concept of internationally trained lawyers practicing in Canada. So I would probably start with them because they've already warmed up to the idea. So you don't need to have that conversation where you're trying to convince them. If you're looking at other opportunities, I think the way that I would approach that is to figure out, again, I'd maybe find firms where they're doing the kind of work that you would like to do, and you can go to them and make it as easy as possible for them. So you're not approaching them and saying, you can hire me, but you're going to have to do all this extra paperwork. It's, you can hire me and look how easy this can be for you. All you need to do, and I'm kind of making this up because I don't know what the process is, but I think the approach needs to make it clear to the employer. And you were talking about skills specifically. So if there's work that you have done that is directly relevant to the work that is being done in that particular firm, to highlight it, to showcase it, to explain why it would be an interesting or an easy transition.
And I think that's the key. Easy. We're making it easy for the potential employer. So part of that is researching the firms. So you need to do your due diligence. I mean, you're going to be a lawyer. You are a lawyer. So do your due diligence on the firm. Look at their website. Look at the cases they're working on. Look at seminars that they are producing, which right now are all online. So there's no excuse to not know what seminars are going on. And as Paula said earlier on, reach out to some of the lawyers. Introduce yourself, find out about them, find out about their practice, learn about the firm. And I think that will really help, because in that process, you'll be showcasing yourself naturally in that conversation as you're learning about them. And from that, you're building that relationship. And this goes back to what we were discussing earlier about networking, relationship building, doors opening, and the long-term process. So I think it's taking that softly approach and coming at it from the side. So not going head on, but come at it from the side and find out about them. Lawyers love to talk about ourselves, if you haven't noticed. We all love to talk about ourselves and what we do. So just get them talking. And most of them will talk to you if you do it in the right kind of way. This is a great opportunity because now you know you've spoken to me, spoken to Paula, you've got Eric on the phone, for example. You now have an excuse to reach out to these people because you've attended today. So you can follow up, and that's a great conversation starter. I attended this seminar that you were speaking at, or I heard you ask this question during this webinar. I'd love to explore that question with you a little bit more and talk about it. It's a way of opening the door to discussing things and maybe breaking that barrier down a little bit and finding an alternative route in. So I think very smart, Paul, even though I put you on the spot there.
No, and I'd also like to highlight, Siobhan, that you've created this wonderful organization. The Global Lawyers of Canada is a community of lawyers who are in the process or who have come to Canada from abroad, and being able to look at others within the community who have joined the kind of firm that you're hoping to join, and to ask them, this is a community that is helping each other. What was it that you found helpful? Maybe they'd be able to tell you the skills that were directly applicable to their new positions, how they were able to speak with potential employers to make it easy for them, or to sort of shine light on the value that they bring to the table. I think we need to recognize just how much this community is able to support one another. So.
Absolutely, thank you. Yeah, no, the community is fantastic, and we now have chapters the whole way across Canada. We're looking at expanding into more, so it doesn't matter where you are. We probably know somebody who's relatively close geographically speaking. I mean, Canada's a big place, but they're relatively close. But it doesn't matter where we are geographically. It may be that somebody works in a particular field, as Paula says, that you're interested in. You can go onto our website. I'm going to give ourselves a little plug here, glcanada.org. You can look at our board members, and you'll see a big long list of all the different chapters, all the different board members, past board members, has our contact details. You can reach out to all of us. And if we don't know, we probably know somebody in the community who can probably talk to you about something that's more relevant to your particular area. And even if they weren't an internationally trained lawyer themselves, we know an awful lot of people like Paula who are incredibly friendly and open to talking with people. So we can definitely put you in touch with somebody in the legal community to chat with you. Eric is writing some great advice in the comments, so make sure you guys read that as well. He's giving lots of tips and things in there. Sonia has offered for people to reach out to her too. Sonia is from South Africa originally, and she's doing the LPP. So if you're interested in Ryerson's LPP program, please do contact Sonia. I know nothing about it apart from what I read on the website. So for everyone who's asking me. on that one. One of the very last questions I'm going to ask for you, Paula, is, do you personally provide mentorship, or is it just coaching you're doing these days?
And
there's no right.
Most of what I'm doing is coaching, the coaching work and the student training, and I haven't really thought about whether I'm doing mentoring. Within the course, I've been doing some mentoring, but I'm always happy to chat with people and say hi and to help out as much as I can. So
perfect. That's a great way to end. Paula, thank you so much. You've given us all so much to think about today. Honestly, I'm like looking at all the different things I've been doing and thinking, oh gosh, that's transferable. That's transferable. And right now, as you say, there are so many other opportunities that maybe we haven't thought about, where we can use our legal knowledge, our legal education, and put it to good use in other places, especially as corporations look at bringing legal work in-house. There's lots and lots of alternative legal things out there. So definitely do one of those like internet searches, alt legal positions, because you'll also learn lots and lots of transferable skills back into a more traditional law firm environment as well, if that's the route you want to go. But for everybody out there, let's give Paula a nice round of applause. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you so much for having me on here, Siobhan. It was such a pleasure to speak with you and to speak with everybody in the GLC community. So thank you so much for having me. It's been such a pleasure, and yeah, it really has been wonderful. Thank you for having me.
I'm so glad we finally got to do this as well. Paula and I just stood in a street corner talking for hours one evening, and look where we are now. We're talking to all of you around the world. So this is networking in true action, although at that point we were allowed to actually stand close together and talk. Guys, if you do have any follow-up questions, if you do want to reach out, you can reach out to Paula, myself, Eric, Sonia, I'm sure everybody else in this group. I will be posting this video on our YouTube channel. So if you go to YouTube, type in Global Lawyers of Canada, it will show up over the next couple of days. And I will also be putting into the comment box for that video a breakdown with time code stamps of all the questions that were asked today. So you guys can just fast forward to the bit that's most relevant for you. And it will also have all of our contact details just in case. Next week, we are going to be joined by an in-house counsel for Upstream, which is part of Shell. So that's oil and gas in Calgary. Don't really know what we're going to talk about yet. We're going to work that one out tomorrow, so stay tuned and join us for that one. And we're here pretty much every Thursday, and for those of you studying for your NCA exams, we all have our fingers and toes crossed for you. This one's going to be very different, so we're looking forward to you all coming back afterwards and telling us how it went, because this is the first time it will be online. Everybody have a lovely weekend. Paula, have a fantastic trip away this weekend. You've most definitely.
Thank you so much. Looking forward to some time away from no offense, but I'm looking forward to having some 3D interaction, because the 2D is wonderful, but it's been intense. I think we've all been Zooming quite a bit lately, so.
Absolutely.
Nice to have a little...
We all need to take some time to recharge our batteries in various different formats. So if you are studying, do take some breaks. You know, your brain works better with little breaks where it can actually absorb all the information you're putting inside of it. So if you can, get outside, get away from your computer, stop listening to me jabber on, and we will see you all very, very soon. Bye, everybody.
Thanks again.